Another type of pride is, a worse form of pride, I think, is stubbornness. Hey, my ancestry is Scottish. I get stubbornness. Stubbornness is when we shun correction. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're right, hang in there, because we live in a world where they say Jesus is wrong, and you need to hang in there. But stubbornness is when you're told you're wrong, you're showed you're wrong, you're showed you need correction, and you're like, no, and you refuse. And basically what happens is the more stubborn you are, the more time and energy you have to spend defending yourself. And the more you have to defend yourselves, guess what happens? The more you see that you could never be wrong. As I said, I compared it with the ways of the world. But, be leery of the world telling you. But I'm saying if fellow Christians who love Jesus are saying, hey, maybe you might not want to do this. Remember that word? Admonishing you? Listen. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 1 says, actually, before I get to that, I've been at churches where church council is ignored. Council as in elders of the church or friends going to people and telling them. And guess what? It doesn't work out for the stubborn person. It doesn't work out. And I'm sure we could probably ask ourselves if we've ever been stubborn. And if you say, I've never been stubborn in my whole life, remember you're in church, don't lie. Proverbs 29 verse 1 tells us, one who is often reproved yet remains stubborn will suddenly be broken beyond healing. That's scary. Will be broken beyond healing. Third form of pride. So we have vanity, we have stubbornness. A third form of pride, let's call it the term comparison. And in this form of pride, we see a difference between pride and greed. Greed wants more. More. Makes you happy. You're never actually happy because you always want more, but that's the idea behind it. Give me more. Pride's a little bit different. Pride isn't how much you have. Pride is as long as I have more than the other guy. I had an aunt who was like that. She could have given instructional videos on how to keep up with the Joneses. But she never wanted to keep up with the Joneses. She always wanted to be slightly ahead, right? That's pride. C.S. Lewis, again, in Mere Christianity, he talks about this form of pride, and he says this: they are not proud of being rich or clever or good-looking. They are proud of being richer or cleverer or better-looking than others. And that leads to a fourth form, most dangerous form of all, most serious form of all, of pride, called exclusion. If you're prideful, actually, before we get into that, Jesus gave us many wonderful things, of course. Everything he said was wonderful. But what did he tell us was the two greatest commandments? Trivia time. I don't know how I got up to 3, but we're getting there. Okay. Yes, good. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Do you see that? See the order of that? Somehow, you know, I think what happened was, I think someone in society read the Bible backwards. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And yet society says self, and then they don't have enough energy to do anything else after. When you're prideful, you put all your energy into you. And pride prevents you from doing what you're supposed to do. Loving God, first of all, and then loving others. And, you know, these are commands of Jesus. There's no ambiguity here. There's no, I wonder if Jesus thinks if we should do this or not. It's very bluntly clear. But the more prideful we are, the more our capacity to love others is destroyed. And all we have left is self-love. And the worst part of all of this, you could argue, is we live in a society where this evil response to others is no longer held in contempt. If you're older, you may remember a time when it was. It was not good to be prideful. But nowadays, we celebrate being prideful. Today, we live in a time of self-promotion. We don't defend the rights of everyone. We defend my rights. We don't vote for what's best for our community. We vote for what's best for me. We take care of ourselves. Why? Because I deserve first place, which we know is wrong. This is the mindset. And things become self-serving. We live in a society that's deemed by philosophers as postmodern. And the philosophers tell us that in postmodern society, there is no such thing as absolute truth. If you believe it, it is true. And if you can't think of anything more evil, I agree. You believe it, so it's true. No wonder we have this nonsense of people thinking they're cats. I'm old enough to know when that was a medical disorder that needed to be treated. And thankfully, the medical people are starting to speak up and tell us that truth once more. Very quietly, but I have optimism that we will come back to that. Because you can't stain such idiocy. You can't. Well, if I believe it's true, I believe I can stand in front of a bus and not get hit. You're only going to do it once. And then everyone else is going to have their opinion that you can't do that. Pride causes exclusion. It's certainly, and sometimes as Christians we say, oh yeah, but the society is so terrible. I wish they were as good as we are. Yeah, well. Christians suffer from pride as well. Especially Christians who are doing their darndest to try to be Christ-like, because Satan comes up to you when you're doing your best to be Christ-like, and he comes up and goes, look at that guy. He says he loves Jesus, and he's not trying to be Christ-like. And then you go, yeah. And then we judge that guy. And maybe you don't know what's going on with that guy, and he's doing all he can do to be Christ-like, but there's circumstances weighing him down. But when we listen to Satan, we don't see that. Our pride goes, yeah, we're better than those people. It's kind of like a diet. If you've ever been on a diet. If you're on a diet and you went from eating anything you want to all of a sudden being very good at selective of what you eat, what you do is sit down at the supper table and you see someone not eating well, and you go, well, you shouldn't eat that. And they get mad. They're like, well, you ate everything like 3 weeks ago. What are you talking about? But Christians do the same thing, right? This is what was happening at Philippi. No, I'm not talking the diet. At Philippi, what happened is Christians were going around going, man, you're pretty sinful. You're not a very good person. You're not good like us. They were doing that within the Christians. They were certainly doing that within the community. And Paul's like, no, that's just pride, guys. You're missing the point. We're not supposed to be doing that. This is one of the big reasons, if you notice throughout our lessons in Philippi, there's never a statement from Paul saying the Philippian church are not Christian. Never. The statement is, act Christian. I know what your faith is. Now act it. Live it out so people can see that there's something better in this world. And that something is not a thing at all. It's a person, Jesus Christ. And in our lesson for today, Paul says, okay, we all struggle with pride at some points in our life. So here's the antidote. Here's the thing that completely obliterates pride. It's the exact opposite of pride. And I'm going to show you this antidote by showing you the perfect example of this antidote. The perfect example of that antidote should not surprise anyone in this room is Jesus Christ our Lord. And the antidote is humility. Jesus, the most humble human who ever existed and ever will. Paul continues by giving us, so here's the thing now, then all this whole parameters shift. You're not sure if you're prideful. Maybe you look, are you vain? Are you stubborn? Do you compare different things with you having other things? Do you put yourself first than everyone else? Those are good to keep track of. But it's also good to see if you're actually humble. Because when you're not humble, then the question becomes, then what am I? Because I'm not being Christ-like. I'm supposed to be humble if I'm Christ-like. So Paul points out in the different verses, 4, 5, 6, etc., he says, this is what Jesus did. He said, if you are humble, you think of others before you think of yourself. You think of others before you think of yourself. I like the fact that as a church family, we do things for everyone. I think back, and I hope it happens again this year, we got to figure it out, where our harvest festival, and people from this high, no, not Doug, he's a little taller, children to adults, they come, they talk, there's games for the kids, there's something for everyone. And guess what? I don't hear, really, we have to do games for the kids, really? We think of what a wonderful place for kids to spend Halloween night at with their church family. Singing songs with Joel about Jesus and then playing games, right? We think of others. Verse 3 tells us, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Wow, is that countercultural? Let's put it another way. Be selfless instead of selfish in your way of thinking. Put other people first. Because if everyone's doing that, someone's going to put you first. But you don't worry about that. Because you want to be Christ-like, putting others first. I think parenting, parents who are doing what they're supposed to do is a wonderful example of this. What do parents do? Well, as soon as they have kids, they sacrifice. They sacrifice their time, their energy, their money. While sometimes they want to rip their hair out, they're generally quite pleased to do it. And what those parents teach is they teach the kids to put others first. And when we watch those parents sacrificing for their kids, now I'm not talking about spoiling and because that ruins kids, but I'm saying, you can't go out on a movie night because you have to take care of the kids. That's a sacrifice. And when you watch parents doing that, it inspires everyone. Paul reminds us that humble people are following Jesus' example. Okay? That humble people think that others' needs comes before their own. That's putting others first. Paul tells us in verse 4, he talks about a humble person should be one who has sacrificial servanthood. So you don't just think other people are better, you actually put it into action. You don't just say, oh yes, other people are more important than me. You actually show by the way you live that other people are more important than you. Verse 4, Paul says this. He says, each of you should look not only to yourself. Sorry, let me say that again. I should read it properly. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. We're to be Christ-like, and Christ was just not doing an outer appearance. Christ was just not saying, hey, look at me. This is how you should act. He was reflecting what was inside. He was revealing the nature of God. And if we are doing our best to be Christ-like, we are supposed to be revealing the nature of God. Next week, we'll talk about wanting to do the will of God. as opposed to begrudgingly doing the will of God. We'll talk about next week. Keep you in suspense there. God is a self-sacrificing being. Right? And if we're truly Christian, we truly want to be Christ-like, then we have to be self-sacrificing. And there's so many ways to be self-sacrificing. You know, picking up the phone and calling someone that you haven't talked to in a while. I know sometimes we think, yeah, I can't really do much. I don't have access, maybe I don't have the money, maybe I'm not physically able to. If you have breath within your lungs, you're able to. Just find the way God wants you to do it. He wants us to do it, no matter how costly it is. And I look at our church, and I look at committee members, and the nominating committee is coming up with lists, and they've been asking people, and council will be dealing with that in the next few weeks. And I haven't met anyone in this church who becomes a committee member because they're on a power trip. I have been to churches where that happens. They're helping others, which is the point of it. Third characteristic. First of all, so Paul says, if you're humble, you think of others before yourself. If you're humble, you serve others. Sacrificial. What does that mean? That means it affects you. It costs you. I'm not saying necessarily money. Sometimes it might be money. Sometimes it might be you take someone out to Tim's. I always say Timmy's. Take someone out to Timmy's, and it costs you a few bucks. Or it could be costly of your time, which is your greatest commodity because you don't get any more of that. And the third thing Paul said today in our lesson for today is if we're truly humble, we desire to glorify God instead of self. In our text, Paul reminds us today, as he was telling the Philippians so long ago, that everything that Jesus did was for the glory of God, was to glorify him. Truly humble people are ones who do it for God. They don't do it for glory. And maybe you've met people like that. And sometimes we put people in an awkward position. We like to appreciate. It's wonderful, right? Because we're a church family. We like to appreciate what others do. But sometimes people really don't like it when we say, and thank you so-and-so. Because they weren't doing it for clapping. They weren't doing it for our approval. They get it. I've talked to people who really don't like it. They get it, but they're doing it for God. These are the people who you do something in the community, and at the bottom of the list it'll say anonymous. They're not doing it for credit. They're doing it for God. They're embarrassed or upset when their names are put up in the lights. It's just for God. Now, after studying this, I have to admit, I feel a little bit guilty. This is one of the passages that, probably not my favorite passage, because I don't like what I see when I read it. Because when I read this passage, it brings to mind the times in my life where I have been pridefully me first in my attitude. Thinking way too much about myself, thinking way too much about what other people think instead of what God thinks. Because that's all that matters. And I know everyone in this room has done that at one time. Put yourself first. And we know when we do that, and this is what bothers us as Christians, because we know when we do that, we shouldn't. And we go back after, and we're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But don't let Satan trick you. Because that's when Satan's going to say, yeah, you shouldn't have done it. You're not a good Christian. Maybe you're not even a Christian at all. It's all just lies. It's just being a sinful human who messes up. What we do is to show we understand Jesus, is do what he says. And next time, not mess up. We just keep on keeping on. This day and forevermore. Please stand if you're able for our last song. One of the most effective things Satan can do is promise you pleasure. And he tells you about how good it is when you look at things and see how wonderful job you've done. But it's just part of his lies, because there's no greater pleasure than seeing how God can use your life to make a difference for his glory. And if you've experienced that, you know exactly what I mean. If you haven't, you can. Like saying, you're in charge, God. Listen to the Holy Spirit. Allow him to guide you. And you will see things you never could imagine. And then you'll be in awe because you know you've done nothing about it. So reach out to those family members who are lost. Right now are destined for hell. Reach out to the community members who mock you because you love Jesus. Reach out with Jesus. Put him in the forefront, put him in control, and watch the change as he is glorified. This day and forever. Have a blessed week.